Hey everyone. Today I get to talk with Betina Anton, the author of the new book, Hiding Mengele. Mengele, the Nazi scientist, also known as the Angel of Death. So, Betina, welcome. So I think my first question to you is, what's some of your background and why did you want to write this book?
Hi, Erik. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm a journalist for almost 20 years. And I wanted to write this book because I have a personal story with one of the main characters of this book, Lieselotte Bossert, who was my teacher in kindergarten. And I found out that she harbored Mengele here in Brazil. Mengele lived in Brazil for almost 20 years. And Lieselotte Bossert was the person who buried Mengele under a false name and also was friends with him and so on. And I discovered this from a very early age. When I was 6 years old, Lieselotte was my teacher. Of course, I didn't know who Mengele was, but I knew he was a evil man. I knew something very, very bad had happened. And I always wanted to know more about it and to investigate it. So since I'm a journalist, I also have a master's in history. So I always wanted to go after the story and to get to know more about what Mengele did in Auschwitz and also how my community was. Was it a Nazi community? What were they sympathizers? There were lots of questions that I wanted to have answers to.
Oh, yeah. Well, I was impressed in going through the book. You have a long list of sources at the end. It feels very extensive, like some of the interviews you were able to get. And you looked at like a lot of the letters that he wrote, right? So it struck me as just really impressive. Like you have a lot of firsthand account of people that were actually involved with this. I think
Yes, thanks.
yeah, and I think it's deceptive because you think, the Holocaust, Auschwitz, that was so long ago, everyone must be dead already, but it's not true. Like there's some people around, like your kindergarten teacher. Like it surprised me how modern and relevant it still is. So one thing that I noticed was when I talk to the people that I know about Mengele, there seems to be a generational divide. If you were around in 1985, you probably know who it is, and it's like a common sense question of who Mengele is. And if you weren't around, you haven't heard of him. For the people who are in that other camp who haven't heard of him, what's his background? Like why is he so awful?
I could say that Auschwitz is the symbol of the Holocaust and that Mengele is the symbol of Auschwitz. So in this sense, Mengele is a central figure in the Holocaust because he was a Nazi doctor, he was an SS officer, and what he did was he made these selections in Auschwitz. He decided who should leave, who should live and who should die, who should go to the gas chambers. But of course, he wasn't the only doctor that did this, but he was a doctor that went very frequently to the platform to select people because he was also a scientist and he was after people that could serve to his experiences, mainly twins, but also other people like people with abnormalities, like giants or people with dwarfism and so on. So he was looking after people that he could use as guinea pigs in his experiences in Auschwitz, because in his thinking, these people were going to die anyway. So he wanted to use them for his own researches. So he started doing lots of research. They don't make sense nowadays. If you take a scientist, normally a scientist takes one subject and spends years, maybe decades, studying only one subject. That was not what Mengele did. Mengele wanted to take advantage of all these people and research the most as he could. So he had like 10 lines of research in Auschwitz. So So this doesn't make sense. He was complete crazy, and he made a lot of people suffer. Many people died, and so on. And he became very famous by doing research on twins, because the twins at this time, even before the World War II, they were the main mean that you could use to do research in genetics. It was a very modern way of doing research in genetics. So he was a scientist. He had 2 PhD degrees. So, but he followed the medicine of his time, the medicine of the Third Reich. And in this medicine, like, Jews were a sub race, and the Aryan race was the master race. That's what was their thinking, you know. So Mengele was an evil doctor, and he did a lot of research with people, and he sent thousands of people to the gas chambers in Auschwitz. So to be very quick, this was Mengele.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting to me the nature of evil in his case, because he wasn't torturing people for like the joy of torturing, like it was under the guise of science and science research. To me, reading through your book, it struck me as he just didn't care. There wasn't like a joy in their suffering; it was just an indifference. Because it's like in under the Third Reich, you could experiment. You couldn't experiment on animals, but you could on Jews. It's like they were in this separate category, which is boggles my mind how you can live in that and justify that in any way.
Yeah, it's horrible. And Mengele was this doctor. He was not. Many people, I read many times people saying that he was a pseudoscientist, and the problem is he wasn't a pseudoscientist. He was a scientist of his times, and the problem was the ideology of his times in Germany. You know, he went to the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute, which is now Max Planck Institute. From this institute, we have a lot of Nobel Peace Prizes. So, you know, he wasn't a pseudoscientist. He was a scientist with 2 degrees, and also he went to the best German universities in Frankfurt and also in Munich. So the problem wasn't like that he didn't have education and that he was a crazy man. No, it wasn't like that. The problem was with the ideology of this time and with the medicine of the Third Reich. So that's why I avoid calling him like a monster, or because if you call him a monster or something like that, it seems that he was an exception. He was, you know, he was the monster. He was like a psychic. He was someone that was really evil. It wasn't like that. The problem was with the whole system. The whole system was wrong and could produce a lot of Mengeles. Of course, he was extreme. He was really extreme because he was obsessed with his career as a doctor. He wanted to have a career in university after the war. So that's why he did so many researches on twins, on people, on his guinea pigs, let's say so.
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting point, because there was like a vacancy of a doctor that specialized in anthropology at the time, and so Mengele filled that role perfectly, and that's why he got the position. It wasn't like he was this evil guy with lots of evil intentions and he made all this happen. Like there was a vacancy that he filled because of the ideology, just like you're saying. Oh, and the other thing I thought it was interesting that you brought up in the book was that he wrote a thesis or a book that was required reading until the 1960s. So it's like he actually was, you know, a scientist, you know.
Yes. And also something that's very weird for us, like nowadays, that like many doctors in the Third Reich, they were also anthropologists. And for me, in the beginning of my research, this was really weird because nowadays, when we think about doctors and anthropologists, they don't have anything in common, in my view, at least. But at that time, they had everything in common because it was a racist regime. So they were trying to prove that there were this Aryan race that was better than the others. So the doctors had to be anthropologists, so they could use science in a way to do measurements and so on to prove that one race was better than other. Nowadays, we know that this doesn't exist, and you don't have this idea of pure race that doesn't exist. But at this time, they were trying to prove this, like that's a heritage of colonialism as well. So I discussed this a little bit in my book. It was not just the Nazis that thought that. Also in the United States, you had some thoughts like that. But I thought this was really weird to have doctors that were also anthropologists.
Yeah, yeah, definitely a symptom of the times and what was going on there. So after he or after the Red Army comes to Auschwitz, he flees just in time. And you go through in your book of why he's not captured then, and how he gets away, and how he keeps evading capture. What's like, how does that happen? Because a lot of prisoners saw him because he was around the prisoners so often. Why wasn't he captured more quickly?
Yeah, it's amazing because, I think this is one of the things that made Mengele so famous, because he was one of the most famous Nazi fugitive of all times, because he was on the run for 34 years and almost 20 here in Brazil. And I think, like, since the beginning, he was very careful and mindful of all his steps. So he was always one step ahead of his captors. So, like, when he left Auschwitz, he went to other concentration camps at first, but then he had to go to a camp. So in this camp, he took away his SS uniform, because he knew if you belonged to the SS, you were a criminal already. This was something that he already knew. So from the beginning, he took off his SS uniform. He chose another name, and every time he was thinking ahead not to be captured. Then in 49, he came to Argentina. Here in Buenos Aires, he didn't use his own name. He used another name, but here in Buenos Aires, that there was like such a Nazi community after the war. There were lots of Nazi criminals in Buenos Aires. They met I went to Buenos Aires to do some research. I took some pictures of the houses where they met. They were like almost mansions, and they were like, if you imagine all these Nazi criminals together in these nice houses in the suburbs of Buenos Aires. They could speak German, they could discuss their ideas, and what ideas they had. And many of them weren't just Nazis, they were Nazi criminals. One of them was Adolf Eichmann, the guy who was kidnapped in Buenos Aires in 1960 by the Mossad. Mossad is now very famous because of the pagers in Lebanon last week. Yeah. But Mossad did a lot of operations, and one of them was to kidnap Eichmann, and also to kidnap, they tried to kidnap Mengele here in Brazil as well in the 1960s. So, yeah. And also he was always ahead. This is one thing. And the other thing is that he had the help of his family. His family was a wealthy family. They had an industry in Bavaria, in southern Germany. So until his last days, he received money from the family. So this is another thing that made his escape possible. And also here in Brazil and also in Argentina, he got connection with Nazis that helped him to escape.
Okay, so he escapes to Argentina, and life seems pretty good for him still, in that he has there's a time where he is pretty well set up there in Argentina, and then after Eichmann, that gives him the paranoia for the rest of his fugitive time, because he's like, I could be next. That's what I'm gonna say. So that was one of my favorite parts of the book, when you talk about how they almost got him when they were getting Eichmann and they were trying to get Mengele too. It reads like a thriller novel in a way, like them putting the clues together and almost getting him. And can you talk a little bit about his close calls for getting caught?
Yes, so it's very amazing how they almost called Mengele many times, the Mossad, and also it's even more amazing for me because this all happened very close to my house. I think 40 kilometers from where I live. So this is really amazing. So I went to Israel and I interviewed this Mossad commander, Rafi. When I interviewed him, he was 90 already, but he had very, very clear mind and he remembered many things. And he told me many details that were very tasty. For example, he told me why Mossad kidnapped Eichmann first, for example, because they got an order from Ben Gurion, the prime minister and also founder of Israel, that they had to kidnap a Nazi. But which Nazi? They didn't know the Nazi that they found first, that they would find first. So they found Eichmann first, but it could have been Mengele as well. So they
Yeah.
kidnapped Eichmann first, and then they tried to do the same thing with Mengele. So they came here to very close to where I live, to Itapecerica da Serra, and because they started to follow a friend of Mengele, Wolfgang Gerhardt. So these guys from the Mossad, they came from Israel, but they could not like start speaking English or Hebrew because everybody would discover that they were agents or something like that. So they they recruited a Brazilian agent. Brazilian, I think it was the first Brazilian Mossad agent in history. And that was something that the Hafide Eitan told me, because they needed a guy that could ask around, and they pretend they were going to buy land here in São Paulo, where I live, the state of São Paulo. So this guy, his function, I interviewed him as well, and he said that his function was to ask around, I want to buy some land. Do you know if there's a farm nearby? So who lives here? He started to ask these questions always in Portuguese and also with the accent of people who live here. So this was very funny. So they were in these dirty roads here close to me until one day they were like face to face to Mengele. But as Hafietan was explaining to me, Mossad, when they come to their target, they just don't kidnap the person. They have a modus operandi, and they have like phases. The first phase is to locate the person. The second phase, they have to observe the routine of this person, who this person talks to, where does this person go, and so on. And then they elaborate a plan. And then the fourth phase is really to do the kidnapping. But when they were in this first phase, they had a call from the Mossad in Israel calling them back because there was a bigger threat, a more urgent threat, let's say so, coming from Egypt, because German scientists were helping Egypt to develop missiles that could like target Israel in any part of the country. So Mossad went back and had to deal with the problem of the German and Egypt missiles. So Mengele wasn't caught at this time. And then later, the Mossad came back to Brazil with other agents. But what I think is, like, I read Mossad archives. That's why I know many other things apart from that Rafietan told me. And the thing is, I think they didn't have like something centralized, because it's very crazy. When the German police found out that Mengele was in Brazil, if you see the documents, the Israelis already knew the name of Mengele's friends here in Brazil in the 1960s. So the Israelis were more than 20 years ahead, but they didn't like have all the information in the same place, so they could like have captured him. So it's really amazing. Now, when we read this now, it's pretty obvious that they were very, very close.
Yeah. So you got to appreciate that the chaos, I think, through all these phases where he almost gets captured because like right after the war, right after he leaves Auschwitz, there's the chaos of World War II coming to an end and lots of people moving around so he can get lost in the crowd there. And then in Argentina, it's like he always follows a haze of 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 that makes him hard to follow. Which sometimes it sounds like is just lucky for him, like him leaving for Portugal like a month or so before things started changing around.
Leaving for Brazil, you mean?
Yeah, yeah, left Portugal for Brazil just like a month. Like if he had stuck around another month or two or something like that, he would have probably
To
gotten caught.
he went to Paraguay.
Paraguay,
He went, yes, he
uh,
went to Argentina, then to Paraguay, and then to Brazil.
right?
Because he went to Paraguay because there was in 1959 there was a arrest warrant, the first arrest warrant against him in Germany. So he thought, okay, I'll go to Paraguay, and then in Paraguay he got a Paraguayan citizenship, and he thought they cannot extradite me to Germany, so I'm safe here. But when the Eichmann kidnapping happens in 1960, and he starts thinking, oh my God, I'm not safe here anymore because the Mossad will not ask to extradite me. They will kidnap me. So that's why he came to Brazil.
Yeah.
He
So
wasn't feeling safe anymore in Paraguay.
right. So, and then when he gets to Brazil, he finds the families that will take him in. What were the conditions that he was living like towards this part of his life?
Yeah, he lived for 18 years here in Brazil. So at first he came, he had a contact here, Wolfgang Gerhard. This was an Austrian guy who was a Nazi fanatic. For example, his son was named Adolf after Adolf Hitler.
Yeah.
He at Christmas he put like a swastika on his Christmas tree. So he was a really Nazi fanatic, and he wanted to help Mengele. For him, it was like an honor to help him. And Mengele got to Wolfgang Gerhard because they had like a little net, a Nazi net, and he had a good friend in Argentina, a pilot called Hans Ulrich Rudel, who knew Wolfgang Gerhard here in São Paulo. That's how Mengele came here and had this contact here in São Paulo. But Wolfgang Gerhard had four children, and he couldn't keep Mengele with him. He didn't have enough money, enough means to keep Mengele with him. So he started to look for a family who could stay with Mengele. And he found he was Austrian, Wolfgang Gerhard. So he found a family who was Hungarian. They met at an Austrian-Hungarian club here in São Paulo, and he asked this couple if they could keep a friend that was from Switzerland, and they didn't give his real name. So that's how Mengele went to live with this family. This family didn't know who he was, and he spent like almost 1 year with them until they found out from the newspapers that he looked very similar to this guy in the newspaper and so on. And then he said, all right, it is me. I'm Joseph Mengele. That's how they found out. And then he spent 13 years with this Hungarian family. And this Hungarian family didn't want to live with him anymore. And after this time, he went to live alone here close to São Paulo capital. But he didn't live all by himself. He had this other family who helped him, the Bossert family. And this family, they were Austrians that fled from Austria after the war. And this couple, Lieselotte Bossert, was my teacher from this couple. And they and her husband, Wolfram Bossert, every week went to have dinner with Mengele. and also Liselotte. And Mengele was kind of part of the family. He was called the uncle, and he helped with the kids. And they traveled around. They went to the small farm that they had here close to São Paulo. They went together to the beach. They went together to waterfalls, and so they did a lot of things together.
Yeah, so he goes from his high position in Germany to working on a farm day in and day out, and I imagine one of the things that I think is interesting about in the book, there's a sense that he's not getting caught because he can just live however he wants, but there's also a sense of paranoia because he knows what happened to Eichmann, and he knows that the Israel agents could be around any corner. So he's like, for all these years, he's living in a constant paranoia of that. And you also talk about how lonely it is for him, like the struggle of being so isolated, so apart from the world that he used to live in. I think it's fascinating that dichotomy, like, oh, he got off, and on the other hand, he's not living a good life. I mean, it would seem to be pretty miserable, having to be so unsettled, every waking second.
His son Rolf Mengele, his only son, gave an interview in the 80s when Mengele's skeleton was found here in São Paulo, here in Brazil. And the tone of this interview was like Mengele was really depressed and he wasn't caught, but he was depressed. And his last days were horrible. And I had this idea in mind. But when I started reading his letters, I have dozens of letters that he wrote and that he received, and they were forgotten here in a museum in Brasilia, the capital of Brazil. And they were there. They are in German, of course. And when I started reading these letters that Mengele wrote, especially the letters they wrote, I cannot imagine that he was so depressed. I think he was someone that was going to an old age for the 60s, of course. No, today is different. If you are 80, people are still being presidents. But at that time, to be like 68, 67, it was old age in the 70s, for example. And from what I read, I think he complains a lot, and he was very afraid of living without, of dying, of having his last days without love, without affection. Because he knows people, he talks to other people, he talks to Brazilians, but these people, and he speaks in Portuguese with a Spanish accent. But these people, they don't get to his soul, let's say so, because Mengele wants to speak in German. He wants to talk about high culture. He wants to talk about other things like astrology. He wants to talk about literature. And these people, of course, they don't have this culture. So, but they make company to him. So, for example, in his letters, he says that he invites his gardener to watch television with him on Sundays, and the gardener invites also his sister to come to Mengele's house, and they eat cake together, and they have like Kaffeekuchen. That's something very German. I'm from a German family, so I know this is very German like habit to do this on Sundays, to gather your family and have coffee and cake, And he does this with his gardener and also his sister. And he talks to his mates. He even falls in love with a mate he had, a Brazilian maid. But what he really what he's afraid of is like being forgotten and not having this affection and not having this kind of conversation that he enjoys so much. But in the end, he dies in Bertioga. It's a beach here 2 hours from where I live, and he dies in the arms of his friends. So all his fears, they don't materialize, And also, I don't think he was so depressed because, as I told you before, he used to go to the beach. He used to go to waterfalls. He used to go to churrascaria where you can eat like barbecue. It's something very common here in Brazil. He loved his garden. He loved his dogs. He had his friends. He kept like writing to his friends in Germany, to his family in Germany. He had good friends. So and also here in São Paulo, he could have access to German books. He went to the German bookstore here in São Paulo, and he could buy a lot of books. There were plenty of German books that I found that were with the Brazilian Federal Police. So you could see that he could keep kind of his routine, his own life. He wasn't so miserable as I think his son wanted to paint him, you know. He had a good life here in Brazil, I think so.
Yeah, better than he deserved it. It sounds like
For
not
sure,
the
for
fitting end.
sure.
Yeah, so that's one thing that fascinated me too, reading this book, is you would hear stories of him like having the gardener over to, we like to watch soap operas, and so you have an
Yes.
image of like this old man, sitting down watching soap operas for an evening, and it's easy to forget like everything that happened in the earlier chapters where you're talking about these horrible crimes against humanity that he is committing without moral question. That's something that's so fascinating about this story to me, because I don't know how he can put those together. And I wonder, do you think that he like separated himself from the things that he used to do, or do you think he remembered them? He just thinks that there's no moral problem. I wonder how much cognitive dissonance is going on. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when you read his letters, and I spend a lot of time reading his letters and translating them. So for me, what would you expect? You would expect like someone like Mengele saying, "Oh my God, I regret that so much. I cannot stop thinking of that girl that I did that or I did this," you know. But no, he doesn't say anything about what he did in Auschwitz. He doesn't have any regrets. So he doesn't mention it, you know. So this is very, very disappointing. Like, because this is something that you would expect him to do, you know, someone who did some horrible things as he did. You think, I don't know, at least he wouldn't manage to sleep, I don't know, at night after all he did. But no, his main worries are of a very common person, like someone very normal. You know, he worries about his friends, he worries about his family, he worries about the relationship he has with his son. He writes what he likes to do. He's interested in friendship so much. He cares so much about friendship. So this shows some complexity, I think, of we humans. Like, there's not someone that's 100% evil, you know. He can be a normal guy, and he can also be a monster doing horrible things, things that are unthinkable, and that, you know, all this in the same person. That's, I think, it's really, really, really complex for us to understand.
Yeah, adding on to that, you referenced a documentary in your book, In Search of Mengele, which I had to watch just because it was in there a few times. And so I think that's where I'm getting this story of where they're interviewing, I think it was the Bossards, one of the Wolfram
Can be.
Bossard, and he Wolfram was saying that at that time Mengele lived at a house that was on a curve, and there were lots of accidents that would happen. And Mengele said, "If I'm a doctor, so if there's an accident, I'm obligated to go help them because that's part of the code of being a doctor." And Wolfram said, "But you can't do that, because if you do that, then you'll give yourself away as a doctor, and then the jig will be up. And so you just have to let them, you have to let whatever happens." And Mengele was insisting, like, "No, I'm a doctor. I've got to go help them." So
Yeah.
like his moral code is just so confusing. I can't imagine what he was thinking about on a day-to-day level.
Yeah, it's really confusing. I think, especially for us living today our lives with our freedom, let's say so, because he had like this Nazi ideology until his last days. Like he fought in terms of races, in terms of better races and races that didn't deserve to have their place. For example, the Jews, like what they did in the Holocaust. And when Mengele came to Brazil, he didn't meet like Jews, but all his races was towards the black people. So you can see like his gardener, for example, he says that Mengele told him that he shouldn't like black people because they weren't nice. And there was this soap opera in Brazil. There was lots of stories about slavery in Brazil. And he liked watching them because he liked to watch the black people being beaten. So he was, why? Because he fought in terms of races. He didn't. He fought this until his last days. You know, this separation, and that's why I think in his weird and wicked moral code, he could like help someone that had a car accident, but he could also kill people from other races. I don't know. I think this is very complex and complicated morals that I totally don't agree.
Yeah. I think it's an encouraging thing that his racial ideas are so strange and so obviously backwards to like most people in this generation. Like, why would anyone think that? How could that possibly gain so much? I think
Yeah.
it's a good thing for modern day that that's so absurd to us.
Yes, for sure.
So I wanted to read a quote from your book. It's at the very end. Um, you say, when you're talking about why you wrote it, you said, "My goal is to bring to light a surprising story, a real-life thriller using the same words that were spoken and recorded in interviews and documents. The crimes Mengele committed, his victims, how medicine was practiced in the Third Reich, the sentences other Nazi doctors received for their crimes, and people who supported Mengele's escape. All these aspects form a common thread of this book. Finally, the big question we must face is, how could a criminal of this magnitude and his supporters go completely unpunished in Brazil?" Um,
Yes.
so, which I think is a great question. I kind of had that question in mind when I was reading the book because there are a lot of people along the way that could have done something, but chose not to. There was the girl that was in the concentration camp and was one of the victims of Mengele that happened to be in Brazil and found out where Mengele was, but she was just so scared to do anything about it because he was such a terrible, nightmarish figure to her. She was kind of paralyzed. But then you also have like the families that are giving cover to him that they don't speak up either. So I think there's a spectrum of moral blame to these people that could have done something to stop him, but didn't. I think I'm most curious about the families that were giving him cover, including the kindergarten teacher, or your kindergarten teacher, because I think it's amazing you had a conversation with her.
Yes.
So and as I recall, she didn't feel any regret to
No.
what she had done.
No, and this for me is like something very, very strong and also a big problem and also a reason why we have to talk about these issues, you know. Because if we don't talk about them and if we don't discuss them, people that are not so well prepared, they can think they are normal. So, for example, in the case of Liselotte, what I asked her, do you know what he did and so on? And she said, he Mengele was a scientist. He didn't do anything bad. He People say a lot of things about him, but he didn't do anything bad. He did his job. So then I asked her, do you know this from what he told you? Or do you know this from what you read in books? And then she said, from both. But what I think is that she didn't want to believe what he did. Because uh, in the beginning, she didn't know that Mengele was Mengele. So he was a close friend to her, to her family. And he helped with the kids. He was a nice person with her family and so on. So she didn't want to believe that this guy that was so friendly could also be evil. So she had like she preferred to think that he was a scientist, you know. She preferred not to believe this. And this is a problem of, okay, it's so hard to believe, but it's true. That's why in the book I took so much time telling. I took so many victims and wrote about what they said, like in a 360 degrees panorama, let's say so. Like I took people from many nationalities, like from Hungary, from Italy, from Romania, from many places. So you could, denier could not say like, no, 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 no. Only Jews from Poland say that Mengele was evil. Others Jews don't say that. No, I took many nationalities. One could say only children say Mengele was evil. No. So I took children, I took women, I took old people, I took many professions. I took the doctors. Everybody was describing him as evil, as doing bad things. So you cannot deny this. It's impossible to deny this. So when you deny that Mengele was like a criminal, you don't want to see the truth. That's the basic thing, because I proved this. I proved this with a lot of stories, like stories from many people. So you cannot deny this. It's impossible.
Yeah, wasn't that what Mengele was telling his son Rolf? Like, 'cause was Rolf tried to corner him on this, like what actually happened, and Mengele was like, "You can't believe what they're saying; it's not true." Or wasn't that how it went? For you know, he just denied.
Exactly, because yes, this is also a bit funny for me, because Rolf gave this interview to Bunta magazine, a German magazine in the 80s, and he was telling like his version of his trip to Brazil and the way he tried to make his father say something about Auschwitz. So we have his side of the story. And from the letters that Mengele wrote and also everything, you have Mengele's side. So Mengele tells his friends, like, for example, oh, I know we don't have the same opinions. Like killing people was an opinion. Uh, it's not an opinion. Like we don't have the same opinion, so I avoid talking to my son about politics, about the things that I think. So I try to be like to don't touch some subjects that are a little bit sensible and so on. So yeah, that's it. They are from two different generations, and this is something that really happened in Germany. There was a complete change of mind in the last decades. If you go today to Germany, Germany is the country that has the strongest memory culture that I know. Because if you go there nowadays, like all the children, school children, have to go to concentration camps. They have a lot of Jewish museums, and they are always discussing this, you know, the Holocaust and so on, because they are really ashamed of what they did in the past. So, but this is a new generation, you know. But yeah, they are trying to do it right now, because they know what they did in the past, and they want the new generations to know that and to never do it again.
Yeah, yeah. So I think the overall story of or the narrative of the book is kind of sad, because you have the bad guy gets away is like the story, and he gets away with these awful, terrible things. But there are, I think, notes of hope in the book, like you were saying, the hope for the future generations. Specifically when you talk about the stories of Auschwitz, I think there were some good hero stories that come up, because you have people that are like risking their lives to save people. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, yes. Actually, I think many characters they are characters, but they are real people. Like some of them even lived in the United States after the war. For example, Eva Moses Core. She used to live in Indiana. She set up an Holocaust museum, and for me, she's kind of like an idol because she was 10 years old when she was in Auschwitz. Mengele injected something in her that she didn't know until the end of her life what she was injected to. She had health problems until her last days. But when she was a small kid, she decided that she was going to live. And she did everything to live. So, and she managed to do that. She died like when she was 87, I think. So she had a long life. And then after Auschwitz in the 80s, she managed to gather all the Mengele twins, like dozens of them, and they lived in many different countries in a time when she didn't have internet and so on. And she managed to gather all of them. So I don't think all of them, but many of them, 122, if I'm not wrong. And so she's really an inspiring woman for me. And there are a lot of other characters in this book, other people that like the way they fought in Auschwitz and so on, and how they survived. And they are very, very inspiring people, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. So I like to think that that's the take home of the book, that there's light beyond the darkness of what Mengele did with his life.
For sure, for sure. I think like Auschwitz was the most extreme human experience I can think of, because it was like an industry created to kill people, and it was created by the Germans, who were like a very sophisticated society, and they had this aim, this objective to eliminate the Jews. So when people got there in these cattle cars, like cramped in these cattle cars after traveling 3 or 4 days and so on, and then they went to have only few food, not so much, so little food, and they couldn't sleep. They had to work until exhaustion and so on. And these people survived. They have many things to teach us, like, because they were in a very, very, very extreme situation. I cannot think another situation so extreme as this.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think the book's messages on justice? Because that's also a fascinating thing to me, because what is justice in this case, where you have this horrible guy getting away?
I think there are many, many things we can take from this story. And one of them that I think, in like while I was writing this, is that the victims cannot give up. Never, never. They have to go after the criminals, the perpetrators, because if it wasn't like the mock trial that Eva Moses Core set up with other twins, and they came up with all these stories from Auschwitz that people didn't know. Nowadays we know. But at that time, 85, it was a big scandal. And because of this scandal, because of this commotion, the government, the US government, the German government, and the Israeli government decided to work together and say, no, now we have to go after this guy. We have to know where he is. They didn't know at that time that Mengele was already dead, but it took like a victim's initiative that something was going to be done. Because if it wasn't Eva Moses Core or the other victims, if it wasn't this pressure, I think we will never know that Mengele was buried here in Brazil, because people wouldn't know. How would they know? Never. He was buried under a false name, and nobody was going to be after this story after so much time. So I think the victims, and also in other cases, like there's this prosecutor in Germany, Fritz Bauer, that that went after these stories, and he managed to do in a time that the Justice Department in Germany was full of Nazis, still full of Nazis. He managed to organize this Auschwitz process, that were very famous trials in Germany in the 60s that brought to justice a lot of Auschwitz criminals. Didn't bring Mengele to justice because they didn't know where Mengele was, but they wanted to bring him to justice, to trial. So I think this is one of the main thoughts that I have while writing this book, is that you should not, the victims cannot forget. They have to go after the criminals. And also for me as a journalist, I think I have like a responsibility to register what these victims went through, and also what these victims have to say. And if we have a case like Mengele's, that he managed to escape justice, we have to explain how this was possible so we can avoid this in the future. Nowadays, we have some cases of criminals that are at large. For example, we have like arrest warrant against Vladimir Putin, and he's not going to justice, you know? So, but for sure, he has a lot of victims. So I think the victims should like organize themselves, unite, and don't forget.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think that is a great message, and I thought it was I didn't know the details of this story, so I was just captivated by it. So yeah, I highly encourage everyone to check it out. October 1st, Hiding Mengele. Is there anything you want to say for like where people can get it, how they can follow you?
You can follow me at Instagram, Betina _Anton, BETINA_ANTON. And also you can find the book in the US in bookstores in the 50 states, and also on the internet. So I think that's it.
Okay. Well, great. Well, I highly recommend it. It's a great read, and so check it out on October 1st. Thank you so much for doing this interview and for answering my questions. It's been great, and I wish you luck.